On today's show, we have Dr. John Lieurance. Dr. John is a naturopathic physician, chiropractic neurologist, and an all-around expert in medical biohacking. He is the chief scientific advisor of MITOZEN Scientific and heads up Advanced Rejuvenation, a multidisciplinary clinic with a focus on treating chronic diseases, regenerative medicine, functional neurology, functional medicine, and stem cell research. Dr. Lieurance has spent most of his career focused on finding solutions for hearing loss, balance disorders, tinnitus, degenerative neurological disorders such as Parkinson'S and ALZHEIMER'S, autoimmune disease, chronic Lyme, mold illness, and much more. Keep listening to find out the latest in modern regeneration and rejuvenation. Dr. John, welcome to the show.
Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
Wow, Josh, thank you for that intro, and I'm really excited to be here on your show.
Yeah, man. Thank you again. I should say again. I know for the audience, this is going to be the first time that Dr. John has been on the show. We recorded a podcast several months back, and there was some clerical and mishaps with technology. That's how it happens sometimes. And funny enough, we recorded an entire amazing podcast. I believe I was in London, I think, and we realized after it was recorded that there was no audio. So it would have been just a bunch of this and no words. And of course, that would have been a shame because Dr. John, he is a wealth of knowledge. And so I'm happy to have him back. Thanks for your time. And since that time we recorded, I've been keeping up with a lot of the things you're doing. You're doing some really cool stuff. So before we dive into all the cool stuff that you're doing and the things you have expertise in, let's just quickly go over your background so people want to keep listening and want to know why you're here.
Yeah, well, I think that, the biohacking movement is really just a name that I think came up at some point, and it makes the tree hugger, the granola eating, hippie sound cool, right? My parents were always really very much kind of in the hippie, not so much with the psychedelics as much as it's like natural eating. So much so that I remember my mom would make things that, like, she put, bee pollen in my pancakes, and it was like terrible. Mom, like, this is, what did you put in my pancakes? And she'd keep on trying to sneak different things in my diet, and so I grew up with that, more open-minded, I think, to more, natural, holistic types of endeavors, but also on a military base. And so I grew up actually with some pretty significant toxicity on Camp Lejeune, and you might be hearing a lot of attorneys trying to advertise to people that were on that base. And so I was actually in utero my entire in utero period, 2 years. Entire utero. And then my first 2 years of life on that base, basically with that really toxic water and just some of the most toxic chemicals known to man. A lot of babies were stillborn. In fact, there's like a whole cemetery with babies. And so I feel like I was lucky to have survived that. And my family in general, there's a lot of health issues that we've had to overcome. My dad has cancer. My mom has a lot of arthritis, and I had a lot of energy issues and allergies and sensitivities, and I had asthma really bad as a child. I was hospitalized more times than I can count. But I had exposure to the medical system, and the medical system saved my life. And I have a deep respect for modern medicine and medical. And so it kind of gave me a unique perspective where I was really open to both and exploring both as potential options within a practice of both chiropractic and naturopathic medicine. Um, and so where that really showed up initially for me was within the first year or two of practicing as a chiropractor. I became very injured in my back, and it was a technique of regenerative injection therapy done to my lower back that was just so dramatic. I saw that bringing the medical and the natural kind of chiropractic together made the most sense, because there was some really cutting edge treatments that were beginning, in the late 90s with regenerative injection therapy that eventually moved its way where we started to use platelet rich plasma and stem cell therapy, and eventually high definition ultrasound. We can literally go in and heal these different rotator cuff tears, and we can do epidurals instead of with steroids. We can do it with stem cells and rejuvenate the nerve versus just temporarily dampening some inflammation. But the evolution within orthopedics within my practice, we've really enjoyed for the last, I want to say, 25 years. But then there's the neurological part that really opened up with me with utilizing a technique using endonasal balloon manipulations, and starting to see that I could do physical treatments on people and have these dramatic changes in things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and movement disorders, where people had different dystonias or tremors, people with vestibular disorders and inner ear disorders, not able to breathe, TMJ, a lot of these things that a lot of ENTs and neurologists would see, I would literally be able to do just a few treatments on and resolve them. And so that kind of propelled me into a deeper study into neurology, where I studied functional neurology and eventually became a chiropractic neurologist. But I feel like, we as a profession within naturopathic and chiropractic, we're really way early on in the biohacking movement. And I think we've got a lot of experience in it, and that just the word is a shift, I think, for people to maybe look at it as a technology versus, maybe sometimes it's boring to think about ancestral living and like living off the land and some of the things that historically are looked at as like tree huggers or granola hippie type of things become sexy, right? All of a sudden it becomes sexy.
Yeah. Well, what I find fascinating with your story and many of the other experts in the field and people that I would particularly like to have on the show, a lot of the times we get to where we are based on something that happened to us, right? And I think that's what shapes most of our lives, most of our careers and things like that. But I do find it interesting that as a chiropractor, you are also dealing with back pain, trying to help others, which is kind of paradoxical,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure you're fortunate to have gone through that, because it's what got you to where you are today. And it's interesting also too, because I haven't really heard the term chiropractic neurologist much, but I have had the great fortune of being able to interact with lots of different chiropractors, and there's certainly a spectrum, right? There's some out there that only crack necks and only work on the spine, and that's it. And then there's, like you said, there's those that are well ahead of the curve and doing really, really cool things. And that's where I would like to get with you. It's I would imagine that a lot of what you're doing is experiential. How or what would you say to someone that feels like they don't need to go to a chiropractor, or they have to have PhD or MD behind their name before they can really start trusting the person that they're working with? Is there anything you can offer that would maybe get people to kind of loosen their grip on their thoughts?
Well, I think just seeing what happened with the vaccine rollout and COVID is enough for people to be like, whoa, okay, the system is rigged a little bit, right? And so consider that So like a medical doctor, so like in our country, DOs and MDs are kind of considered like at the top of the healthcare model, right? Because they've got the most widest scope of practice, with, you know, prescription, and surgical and all that. And they're typically what you'll find at hospitals and so forth. And when we look at those professions, and we see that their training is almost solely based on pharmacology. And so like if an individual had like a stomach problem, what they're going to learn in school is going to be a pharmacological answer to that solution. And when you look at, pharmacology, all of these molecules are not generally not natural. They're usually based on an herb, that might have an effect, and then they're isolating the actual alkaloid within that herb that has the greatest effect so that they can patent it, right? Because it has to be patentable, and you can't patent things that happen natural in nature, which generally those are safer, they're more effective, and so when you look at the training that they've had, then like a stomach problem, like most, I'll just give you one example. Most heartburn conditions are caused by H. pylori. Okay, and this is solid in the research. Like 90 something percent of all chronic heartburn cases is actually an infection of the stomach. Okay, they do not learn that in school. They might learn it in a pathology class, but their answer to heartburn is simply because they only have a short amount of time based on the insurance model to write a script, right? I think it's like just a few minutes. And so the script is going to be for an antacid, and most of the time they're prescribing these to these patients for very, very long periods of time, usually life. And what these antacids do is they block the production of acid, but we need acid in our stomach for two things. One, to ionize minerals so that we can absorb them into our body, and also so that we can convert pepsin into pepsinogen so that we can absorb proteins. So by giving people these antacids, we're curing a problem, which is the symptom of heartburn, but yet we're giving this mostly to the elderly, which they're already compromised with absorption. And now these people are further declining from nutrient deficiency. But this is the program that then we have our PhDs and our Harvard grads and whatever, but they're not learning the truth about what's really happening under the hood, because they're not learning how to fix and cure problems. That because the pharmaceutical model and the medical model is to keep people in a perpetual state of sickness, because that's what feeds the prescription model, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It really makes sense. And I'm sure people that are listening will probably think this is just conspiratorial, but I think that we should take everything you said to heart, at least if nothing else, to be just a little more skeptical on everything. I think skepticism has its place in this space. And I think the more that we ask questions, the better the response we're going to get. And so, but I love hearing that, because you're right. I very rarely hear any of the docs talking about these kind of things. And it's not to say that they're inherently bad, but if the bottom line is all about the bottom line, right?
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to be fed into this perpetual cycle, like you mentioned. So I want to thank you for sharing that, because I certainly know lots of doctors out there that are doing good work, and there's certainly a place for some of these doctors, you know, when it comes to emergency medicine and emergency care. But at the end of the day, we should all be doing what we can to become our own biohacker, so to speak, to become our own doctor.
You know, I'd like to just say one more thing to that, because if you really distill it down to something really basic, and this is something that I think can segue into a really rich conversation between us here, is that the body, if we are all going to agree that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating device, right? So you cut your arm, it heals, right? If you get disease, right? Disease, dis-ease is a lack of ease in the body. Then there's something that's happening where the body isn't able to respond and adapt to a stressor, right? And that comes from a life force that flows through every cell of our body, right? And it's doing what we don't have to sit there and think about. It's keeping our body healthy and vital. And what happens is that we get weak. Our life force gets weak. And really that sounds kind of hokey pokey, but what we're really talking about is the energy that's produced in the mitochondria, in the cell, from oxygen and glucose, basically turning into ATP. This is what needs to happen. And this can either be efficient or it can be non-efficient. And when it becomes non-efficient, we become depleted with energy, then our body can't adapt to stresses. And then this is where disease starts to surface itself. So if we can respect that, we realize that at the core of all diseases is a deficiency in energy and an inability for the body to have the capacity to adapt and heal. And when we look at pharmaceutical and even in natural medicine, there's a lot of even holistic doctors that are treating symptoms, right? Because we can fall into that trap, whether we're doing holistic medicine or we're doing pharmacology. And the shortcoming is that we're not actually treating the core of the problem. So therefore, we're not really giving the patient the fullest opportunity to heal completely, right? We might be just blocking a symptom. And there's herbs that can be like, willow bark, right? Which is white willow is like aspirin, right? So these things can be, they can definitely enhance our life. And sometimes we need symptom support. We need to feel better and have relief. But there's also, when you start getting into things like cancer or autoimmune disease or chronic fatigue, there's things that need to be treated at a core level that are completely ignored in modern medicine and often not even looked for.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I may be like dumbing this down way too much when I explain this, but I like to talk to people on the energetic level and the electrical potential within our bodies, right? And this is why I'm such a fan of grounding. This is why I'm such a fan of PEMF. This is why I'm such a fan of photobiomodulation. All of these things deal with the body and the cells on a cellular level. And if we can think of our cells as capacitors, like little batteries, then it should be easy to think, okay, well, what happens with our phones when our battery goes low, right? It goes into low power mode if you choose to set it up that way. And so maybe it doesn't work as efficiently. And then when the battery dies, then you can't use that phone. And so if you want to use that phone, you need to recharge that phone so that you can then use it. And I think everyone can understand that. And that's what I think about when I use some of these tools. And sure, like I know there's lots of people who think, Josh just has all these cool, fun toys just so he can play around. And okay, maybe that's the case. I do want to try to come up with my own experience so I can then explain it to my clients, my friends, and my family. But then we have people like you who make me look like a Luddite, right? Or you've got lots of tools, you've got lots of things that you use to help the body. And that's why I think this is why I love our relationship. I love being able to talk with someone on this level. And with all of your experience, you're still a cool dude at the end of the day, right? Like if you're fortunate enough to be watching this episode, you see that, Dr. John is a cool dude. He's got love and light and all the cool things behind him, essential oils, all these things. But at the end of the day, he's also that guy that can get you out of a state of extreme illness and extreme disease and everything in between. So this is why this conversation to me is very important. So thank you for sharing that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for that compliment. I try to just, I don't know it. A lot of this stuff doesn't really go to my head so much. I think some people, like yourself, I mean, you've had such an opportunity to treat a lot of celebrities. And, I think some people that they get a bit of an ego associated with that. And I've had the luxury of working with some pretty high profile people as well. And a lot of success with MITOZEN and, been a successful clinician for almost 30 years. But, at the end of the day, man, it's all about it's all about relationships, you know,
Yeah.
and if you're elevated above other people, you're not able to talk, you know, equally with people, you know, you're really putting a barrier between you and other people. And it's not a healthy, happy way to live, you know? And
Well
at the end
said.
of the day, we're all just people, right? I mean, some
Yeah.
people might be achieving more in life than others, and that's okay. I mean, we all have our own mission, you know, and we're here for a certain purpose, and that purpose is going to be different between all of us.
Well said. Yeah. And again, thank you for sharing that. So I want to, because you've touched on the fact that you've been a successful clinician for 30 years. You've got a lot of things going for you, and if a person just looks you up, you see that you are rocking and rolling. You're doing really well for yourself. So I'm happy for you. I know that you recently just came out with a new book, and so I would love to
Yes.
talk about that. And then just to make sure that all the listeners and viewers know what we're going to be talking about after all of this, we're going to be touching on several of the products that I like to use from Dr. John's company, MITOZEN, and
Mm.
and just go through all the fun stuff. But let's talk about this book. So it's called Methylene Blue: The Magic Bullet.
Mm-hmm.
And Gordon has it up on the screen right now. It's
Yeah.
available on Amazon, so everybody go out there and get it. We'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. But
Yeah.
let's talk about this. What is methylene blue?
Well, it's really a fascinating molecule. I was able to like learn about it, you know, over a decade ago. And when I first learned about it, I really didn't really buy into it. I thought it was a little bit kind of like far-fetched, you know, it's a dye and you're going to take it internally. And um, I had a colleague that his father had Alzheimer's, and they were doing IVs of the methylene blue. And I remember I would sit there and watch his father get these IVs, and I looked at the bag, and the bag was just a little pale blue. And now we're doing intravenous methylene blue now, and I realized like they were just using like just a few milligrams, because in the early days, you know, we didn't really know how much we could use, the safety. There wasn't a lot of studies. And then Francisco Gonzalez Lima, uh, he's a medical doctor, and he's done a lot of research with combining methylene blue with light therapy, which we can talk about a little bit. Um, and so people like that have come out and kind of paved the way so that we are a little bit more understanding about what the dosages can be, and that's much higher than just a few milligrams. Um, but it was a molecule that was discovered in the late 1800s, and they found that it was the cure for malaria, and it really changed the world, because we're talking about a time where the Western world was really kind of taking over, and there was a lot of battles being fought in jungles and so forth, and malaria was like the biggest issue for you know, the Westerners going in, and they're getting malaria, and there wasn't really an answer for that. And then they discovered that methylene blue, and the way that they did it's really fascinating, because the guy wanted to start studying all these different molecules, and so he had to stain the malaria. It's actually a parasite that carries the malaria. Had to stain it so that he could observe the organism when he would add these other substances. But as soon as he had the dye, he realized he had his cure. And it's still,
Wow.
I would argue, we actually had a patient, we had a few patients that got malaria and traveled to our clinic. They were out of the country, and a lot of them got sick. And then one came back to the United States and was like tested positive for malaria. I was actually with Pavel in Colorado, and it was somebody that worked for him. And he's like, "Hey, can I get this person to your clinic right away?" And it was the weekend. I had my staff come in on a Sunday, and we ran what's called our Luma Blue protocol, where we use silver and methylene blue, and then we use intravenous light. Because even like,
Wow.
so blood banks, the way blood banks work to purify their blood is they put a little bit of methylene blue with the blood, and then they irradiate it with near and infrared light. And so anybody that's gotten a blood transfusion has actually gotten a little bit of methylene blue. And that's the standard of care. And it's been like that for a long time, because there's very few things that can have such a powerful impact on our health, yet not harm us, right? So we look at like antibiotics, which just because, big pharma and the training that they've done with the doctors, and here we want somebody that would be better off going to a medical doctor versus, we have medical doctors here associated with our practice, so it's not really an issue, but we're alternative, right? So somebody that would be really hardcore saying, hey, I would rather take that route, they would find themselves with antibiotics that would obliterate their microbiome. Like, let's say if they got malaria, right? Versus if they were to be treated with this protocol that we use, there's no negative impact to the microbiome, and it leaves the body more charged up, because methylene blue does something to activate our mitochondria and up it by 30%, which is one of the ways that it works. Because when we get an infection and we get disease, one of the main things that happens is the inflammation associated with that condition shuts down our life force. It shuts down our ability to convert energy from oxygen and glucose. And so then our immune system is sluggish, and the infection just slowly starts to kind of take over us. So anybody that's been sick, at first your body is like kind of fighting it a little bit, and then you just all of a sudden can really start to go down. That's when that inflammatory response really starts to shut down life force.
So I am curious because I've heard this before about how old the methylene blue molecule is, or like how long ago it was discovered. And this is the first time I'm even asking this, but I've always wondered, like, what was the method of delivery back then? Because I can't imagine people putting methylene blue troches in their mouth or doing IVs. Do you know what the method of delivery was?
Well, it's been methylene blue as an IV is something that's mandatory for every hospital to carry. And so if anybody found them the way, and as early that they were able to do IVs, they've been using methylene blue as an IV. However, methylene blue absorbs very well through the stomach. And so I don't really like capsules so much. That's why MITOZEN puts it in a bar, which is in a cocoa butter kind of suspension, because we want that to like be completely absorbed in the stomach. We don't want it to get into the small intestines, and we definitely don't want it in the large intestines. Now, we do make a methylene blue suppository, and there may be clinical use for that. However, it wouldn't be something that we would recommend anybody take it on a chronic situation, because methylene blue does have an antimicrobial effect. And there's been some interesting studies where they've looked at the impact methylene blue has to the microbiome. And they found that it actually suppresses a lot of the bad bacteria, and it doesn't suppress all of the good bacteria, but some of the strains it does. So we want to probably look at minimizing the impact into especially the large intestine. So taking it sublingual, there's sublingual options, has been some of the experts have come out and said that, there's really not enough milligrams. You can't really absorb enough through a troche in the mouth, right? And plus, people don't really want their teeth stained and blue. So you can take these bars, throw it in the back of your throat, and then drink some water, and then it absorbs really, really well through the stomach.
And the only downside there, which it is far better than, like, 'cause I don't mind taking the troches, like, and having a blue mouth, just because I'm a little quirky and people kind of expect that. But ever since I've heard you speak about the benefits of the gut and the fact that the gut can absorb it based on the delivery mechanism you use, I started doing that, and it was a lot easier. I got way less questions, which may or may not be a benefit, because I think anytime there's a question, there's an opportunity to educate, right? So that is kind of cool that I can show my blue mouth. But when you take the Lumitol bars, what I noticed is that for some period of time, you're going to have very blue pee. Like, and I know this, the first time that ever occurred, like a friend of mine, he wanted to do one of the troches, and it was very new to me anyway, it was very new. And we were talking about how cool it is and the fact that you can get a little bit of focus because it has a few other things in it. And he came to me the next day and he was like, bro, he was like, man, next time you give me something like this, tell me what might happen. And I'm like, well, what happened? He was like, dude, he's like, I don't know if this is supposed to happen like this, but my pee was blue.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah,
You gotta tell people that they're gonna pee blue, otherwise they're gonna freak out.
for sure. Yeah, and I've kind of played around with, and maybe you can touch on this, especially since you wrote a book on it. I played around with this idea of exercising when I take the Lumitol bar, like when I ingest it, versus not working out. And I noticed that it seems to be less blue when I'm working out and I'm utilizing, all of the mitochondria and I'm really working hard. It seems like it uses it up. Is there any science to that? Or am I crazy?
Well, that's interesting observation. I haven't seen that with myself with exercise. I think it's possible you might be pulling more of it into your muscles. You might be like creating more of a demand from the mitochondria and the muscles, and so it could be pulling it in. But I've not read anything about that, and it's the first time I've heard anybody comment about it.
Okay, interesting. I would love to, because I've been wanting to hang out with you in person for some time anyway, but I think it would be cool to maybe test that out. And I'll tell you the reason why. It's because most of the time when I'm doing that level of observation, it's usually with my electrical muscle stimulation suit. So my company has created an electrical muscle stimulation bodysuit. It's an EMS bodysuit. And there's a lot of information as to like how effective we can activate the musculature and how deep it can go and all these things, and how fast you can activate fast twitch muscle fibers, right away. And so I would love to explore with that and have you try it out as well, right? So maybe I'll get.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen the suit. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm ramping up for a launch this year. Fingers crossed. So, I've been working with a lot of my clients with this, and most of my clients have it, like all of my clients, pretty much. They either have their own suit or they have been using it, right? And so I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, it's time to launch this bad boy and get it out there. But I want to have people like yourself use it because I know people trust what you're doing, and I want to make sure that we attack every sort of question and answer that's possible, and go forward with it. But I'm excited to try it. And also one other thing, in my workouts, I also use baking soda or sodium bicarbonate with my water, and I do a lot of CO2 work, right? And so yeah. I'm wondering if that maybe has an effect on it, but we'll find out, I guess, right? We'll find out.
Speaking of CO2, I have been doing some really interesting things with CO2.
Hit me.
And actually, I've got a tank with like a special, tip on it where you can fill balloons with CO2, or you can fill, have you utilized ozone with like a rectal absorption with it?
I have a video on YouTube of me doing it. So yes.
Yeah. So for people listening to this, basically there's like a special bag and a catheter, and you put it in your rectum, and then you squeeze the bag, right? And it pushes the ozone. And so then the ozone absorbs through the mucous membranes within the colon. And ozone has like all these amazing benefits, but so does CO2. And you can do the same thing with CO2. You can do rectal insufflations with CO2, and it's amazing. And
I have not done that.
And so we'll have to make another YouTube video.
Okay. Well, I can only imagine, because for those of you out there that have done rectal ozone, you understand that ozone fart that happens, it's like you feel, it's like, I used to call it a reverse fart, right? Because you feel it going up you. And the closest thing I would say I've gotten to that with CO2 is I've utilized the body stream. I don't know if you've
the collagen, the bodysuit. Yeah.
And I was actually about to do it the other day, and I realized that because it's like, I don't know what you would call it, but it's like a submarine type suit where it's completely enclosed.
Hmm.
But I noticed the other day when I was going to use it, because I have a CO2 tank with a regulator on it and all that,
Yeah.
and I was about to hook it up, and I realized that there's cracks in the glove. So obviously I wouldn't be able to do that, because you don't want to. You want to keep that CO2 contained. They call it a dry bath,
Yeah.
and I love doing that because of what it does to the oxygen carrying capacity in the body. Like,
Yes.
so I love utilizing CO2, and I have on the way coming this. They call it a carbohaler
Mm.
by Anders Olsen with conscious breathing. And this carbohaler, I'll do some videos on it, but basically it allows you to breathe in. Bless you. It
Yeah.
allows you to breathe in a mixture of CO2 and O2.
Yeah.
And it's I did it. It's almost like
It's pretty intense,
it's
right?
very intense. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very intense. But what we noticed, because he's done some like anecdotal research on it, what he's noticed is that his endurance and his muscular capacity is greatly enhanced,
Yes.
which is really cool. And I think a lot of us know that we can do that with breath work and things like that. But it's also cool to have something a little bit easier in the biohacking space.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so a couple of points as far as rectal CO2. You can do anywhere from 2 to 3 to 400 milliliters rectally, right? Dosage wise, and just straight CO2 right into the bag. It's pretty
Wow.
easy to get set up with it. It's something that you could do like once a day. Some people are doing vaginal insufflations as well. You
Wow.
can insufflate it into the ears.
Yeah.
But when you breathe it, it's really intense because it's triggering the CO2 sensors, right? Which is based in the brainstem, and particularly the locus coeruleus, or the blue spot, which, by the way, I talk in depth about in my book. And people really need to know about this area of the brain because it's such an integral part of the brain when it comes to biohacking, and it makes a lot of the things that we're up to, healing and health wise, make a lot more sense. But for CO2, our acceptance of a certain level of CO2 is going to trigger us to want to breathe, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so when you breathe all that CO2 in, you have this like tremendous urge to want to breathe, but you can't kind of catch your breath. So it's almost like a near death experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You absolutely freak out.
Yeah.
And even if you know it's coming, it's hard to, because it's within our nature, right? It's in our DNA,
Yeah.
and it's hard to, anyway. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So with the rectal part, you don't really have that same gassy feeling. For some reason, it just
Mm,
absorbs really, really well. It doesn't come out. You don't really feel gassy. Like sometimes with ozone, you kind of feel a little uncomfortable. So it's really it's much more well tolerated. And what the CO2 is doing is it's allowing us to release oxygen from heme. And we have this kind of system in our body where if we run low in oxygen, we get more efficient with the oxygen we have by releasing more of it from heme. And that's all regulated through CO2. Because the more we're breathing off CO2, the lower our CO2 is. The less we're breathing, then it's kind of the opposite. So it's like this kind of safety net that we have in our system where we can improve our oxygen delivery. So doing CO2 enhances and finesses this whole oxygen delivery system. And I found at the gym, I just don't get fatigued. I mean, I can just go until the muscle really hurts and I don't feel that kind of oxygen fatigue. Like there's a certain level of fatigue where you're just kind of tired, of like doing the reps. And then there's another one where you're like, you took that muscle to the very end and you're like, okay, I'm
yep.
on to the next one, right? And I feel like I can really get to that consistently after I do rectal CO2. Usually when it's done every day and it's like after I've been doing it for 2 or 3 days in a row, like I feel like I just get into that zone.
Yeah, there is a term that a lot of people know about called the CO2 tolerance, and usually that is done by doing breath work and just how long can you go without oxygen, right? But then I like to describe it as in this other manner, which is how much of that CO2 can you take in when you're breathing. And that's why the carbohaler is pretty cool, because you can directly measure it, right? It's very quantifiable in the moment. And then of course you can see that it's a lot easier to go longer. I think we get less lactate buildup, and I think there's so many benefits to it. And why not? It's easy. It's relatively inexpensive, right? Like, so I mean, obviously at ozone machines and things like that, the initial buy is quite expensive. But if you consider having it for the rest of your life or your entire family, why not? Right.
Yeah.
Same thing with carbon dioxide.
And then you can also fill up a balloon. And what I do is I fill up a balloon, like a third, and then I just blow, to fill it up all the way. So it's not just because breathing straight CO2 is gnarly, right? But
It's a no-go.
Dilute it by, 60% or something like that. You can allow the air to come out at a controlled force through the balloon as well, and take like a partial breath and then breathe the rest. And so you can kind of modify it. But, I would say that for the average person, maybe they would be better off getting a device that could be more precise. Maybe for a more advanced kind of biohacking type of person, they might be able to venture out and experiment with some of these things, but just be careful, be in a safe place, don't be, standing somewhere where you can fall and hit your head. And other than that, I think it's a pretty safe thing to experiment with.
Yeah, thanks for the disclaimer, because you're probably right. There's probably going to be people out there just going willy-nilly because they heard it some guy talk about it on a show. But there are some powerful effects from it. And when I was talking with Anders Olsen about his carbohaler device, it's basically that, like the regulated, you can go from like 1% carbon dioxide, I think, all the way up to 8%, I believe. And it's really cool. It's digital. You can see kind of how it's working. And this was around the time that I was hearing so many people were being put on ventilators during the pandemic. And this light bulb came on, and I'm like, why aren't more of these carbon dioxide devices in the hospitals as well? Because if the goal, or if one of the benefits of utilizing carbon dioxide is to help improve the capability of the body taking up oxygen, then we should be thinking about both instead of just one. And in fact, before my dad passed, he was on a ventilator for some period of time, and I just was like, every time I would go and see him, I would make him do breath work with me. Let's build up your CO2. Let's build up your lung capacity. Let's do all these things that I know that the doctors aren't doing there, right? They're just like, put him on a vent, and good luck.
They're just following the protocols. Again, back to our initial conversation, when you look at what was happening in the hospitals with COVID, the standard of care was remdesivir. And now we know that that's what was killing so many people. But it was pushed through because, Fauci had his, patent on it, and, just lots of corruption. And so if people aren't really fully seeing this and they fully don't understand it, then I think you should go back and really look at some of the facts, because it's just so plain.
Yeah. Well, good segue. And I guess before we move on, I would love to make sure that we talk enough about your book, because it is a huge accomplishment. Congrats on that. I know it's not your first book, but I know it was something big that you were working on. And another thing I would like to talk about, along with Methylene Blue, the new book, is you also have, I think it's called Melatonin Miracle. Is that right?
Yes.
Melatonin Miracle. Great book. You were definitely one of the first to get me to rethink the idea of utilizing melatonin at a higher dose, because before I heard you speak on it, before I, read into your book, I didn't realize, because I used to think, because all I would hear is like, oh, if you use melatonin, your body's natural production stops or it gets blunted, and then you're gonna have to use it for the rest of your life. And it was just like, wow, really? And then you came out with your research, and I was like, wait a minute, this makes a little bit more sense, actually. So So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, whatever else you want to mention with methylene blue, and then let's talk about melatonin.
Sure. Have you heard some of the conversation about methylene blue and nitric oxide, and has that confused you a little bit?
Of course.
Well, yeah, I recently did a podcast with Ben Greenfield on methylene blue, and I was like, really like, Ben, we really need to address this nitric oxide conversation. And he felt like he just needed to keep the podcast to an hour. And so we didn't get a chance to really touch on it. But what I find really fascinating is that when you really look at the research, there's three forms of nitric oxide. There's inducible, which is generally an inflammatory mediated nitric oxide, right? So like infection or toxicity. And it's in place to vasodilate, to bring blood flow into an area, right? To bring the immune cells or to flush out toxins or whatever. And then there's endothelial nitric oxide, and then there's neuronal nitric oxide, right? And if you look at hyperbaric oxygen, because hyperbaric oxygen also in light therapy, sun, infrared, near infrared, red light therapy, all of those work on nitric oxide, right? But what's really interesting is when you look at hyperbaric oxygen and red light, they primarily work on the endothelial and the neuronal nitric oxide, and not so much on the inducible, right? Because the inducible, what happens is that the inducible can be converted into something called peroxynitrate, which is very, very damaging to the body. In fact, it's probably one of the worst substances that's corrosive, especially to the cardiovascular system. So we really don't want to be encouraging the inducible nitric oxide so much. But what's happening is a lot of people have a lot of this inducible nitric oxide in their system because they have chronic infection or they have chronic toxicity. And they've actually determined that this is a direct cause of depression, where they can raise nitric oxide and people get depressed, and then they lower it and they find that the depression goes away. And this is one of the mechanisms that methylene blue works on, because it specifically targets lowering the inducible nitric oxide, and it actually doesn't have an effect on the endothelial or the neuronal. If anything, it helps support them. So it's like you look at, you're like throwing the bath water out with the baby, or the baby out with the bath water, when you just basically say, I can't take methylene blue because it's going to lower nitric oxide. And then is that going to affect my my sexual life, or is that going to affect my physical capacity? Am I going to take it before I go to the gym? And why is it that people take methylene blue, but then talk about how much stronger they are and how much more endurance they have, and so it never really made sense to me. But we get into great depth of that subject with all of the research in the book. We talk about, I've got a section with Dr. Jason Saunders, who's basically got his PhD in hyperbaric oxygen. And we really talk about this protocol we call MITO red blue O2, which is where we're utilizing methylene blue and other photosensitizers along with hyperbaric oxygen and red light therapy. And we talk about the science, and we talk about how people can get set up for this and start doing this at home. And this is a more expensive home setup, because, you're talking about, a sauna or some red light panels, and hyperbaric oxygen chambers are probably going to be, $20,000 to $25,000. So ultimately, you're looking at about 30 grand. But I can tell you this, I've had my hyperbaric oxygen chamber for a long time. I want to say 15 years, and it's still working great. And so this is an investment that people can make, and it could be something that you use for many, many, many years, and your whole family could utilize it. But we get into a lot of depth. We tell people how to do it. We have instructional. We have a whole article from Jason in the back of the book.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be referring to that, because very soon, very shortly, I will be having my very own hyperbaric chamber coming to the apartment here. So I'm kitting out what I'm calling my recovering room, and then If you've seen any of my videos on social media, you probably see I've got a full gym in my apartment. My place is like a biohacking lab, but I'm upgrading to getting a chamber and a sauna. And a lot of the times, because I don't want anyone thinking that I've just got money coming out of my pockets like that, but a lot of times I'm able to leverage some of the relationships I have with some of the clients or some of the companies I'm doing work for. And so, like you, I'm doing a lot of testing. And when I've done hyperbaric in the past, I've always utilized either some sort of like blue-green algae, some kind of photosynthesizer, methylene blue, red light panels, going in and out of the sauna. And so what I plan on doing is a lot more documentation of like the hot, cold contrast therapy, along with HBOT, along with, all the other photosynthesizers. So it's going to get fun. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, like I'm excited about this for a lot of people, because when I started introducing the three together, I really was like blown away at how much more energy and focus and how much just generally happier I was. My neurotransmitters were better. Like I felt excited and motivated and strong in the gym. And so, it really boils down to introducing this into a morning routine. I think if people can wake up a little earlier, what I do is I wake up and I roll right into my hyperbaric chamber, and I actually sleep my last hour in there, right? So I'll set my alarm for an hour earlier than what I want to wake up. And sometimes it's kind of hard, because you're like, I don't really want to get out of bed. The alarm, you're hitting snooze. But usually, I'm excited. I crawl into the hyperbaric chamber. When I get in there, I feel really cozy, and then it compresses. I clear my ears, and then I'm out. And next thing I do, I wake up an hour later, and then what I'll do is I'll go to the beach. And I'll do breath work at the beach, and I'll watch the sun come up. And then I come home and I get into I like the sauna space because it's fast. You sweat really quick and it's really intense, near infrared. And of course, I've got my methylene blue on board while I'm going through all those steps. And I think that's something that most people can do. I don't think that that's something totally impossible. You might have to go to sleep a little bit earlier, right, to make time in the morning before you go to work. So you're giving up a little bit of that movie time, at night, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, like you said, we both touched on this. It's about having an investment in your life and your health and truly understanding what that means, because we can say it and we can hear somebody talk about it. But when you really think about it, if you've lost someone close to you, or if you know someone close to you, I mean, we all are touched by death and illness, right? And so if we can just extend and thrive a little bit longer, then what is that worth to you? Right? Like, I mean, it's priceless. So,
well, there's lifespan, but then there's like how making your life more functional and happy, right?
All
The quality of life, right? Like what's more important than that?
Absolutely.
I mean, you can have all the money. I've got a number of friends that are billionaires or multi-billionaires, and that's not what makes them happy, for sure. I mean, they do some really cool things, but like I said earlier, I think at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. It's like you've got the journey. Life is about the journey, not the destination. But then you really look at like, okay, well, is it about who the company that you're keeping during that journey is really, I think, what makes life worth living.
Beautiful. So, okay, I feel like we've not exhausted, but we've touched enough on the methylene blue book. I will encourage everyone to go out and grab a copy, and hopefully we do like a catch up on it. But if you have the time, because I know time is of the essence, I would love for you to talk about melatonin for a bit, and then any of the other cool, fun products that you have out right now.
Okay. So, I actually have I've got a product we're going to launch pretty soon that might be available by the time this podcast is released, and it's an energy cognition product called SATORAI, and I need to send you some samples of this because it's got all these Ayurvedic herbs that enhance circulation to the brain, along with alpha GCP, which is, I don't know if you've tried that or not, but it's really good for memory. That elevates acetylcholine. But the main ingredient is something called paraxanthine. Have you heard of
Yes.
paraxanthine?
Yeah, I know that one.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, it was a while back, and I don't think I gave it a full go. But if you're talking about it, I'm with it.
Yeah. Well, there's three components to caffeine, and paraxanthine's the main one that gives you a lot of the concentration, the focus, and the mental clarity. But it doesn't have all the jitteriness, and you can actually, if you wanted to go to sleep, you could go to sleep. So it doesn't keep you up as much, like with the full spectrum of caffeine. So basically, it's like an isolate from caffeine, and I found it to be one of the best energy boosting substances. So we're kind of like putting all these things together, and it's going to be in a bar, and we also are going to have a suppository because sometimes people absorb a little bit better with suppositories, because the suppositories are unique in the sense that they maintain something called peak plasma over hours, right? Where oftentimes when we take a supplement orally, or really most any other way, we have a peak plasma that's maybe an hour. In other words, that substance is available for our cells to pull in for a certain period of time. They call that peak plasma. So the longer the peak plasma, the more opportunity our cells have to absorb these different substances. And that's where suppositories or our bullets really make a big difference. And then there's some substances that you just can't absorb orally because the gastric juices, as well as the enzymes and first pass to the liver, right? All these things are there to metabolize and absorb nutrients, but they break them down. And there's a lot of nutrients that are too fragile to make that journey, which, like, NAD is a big one, right?
That's right.
Glutathione, melatonin. Melatonin, they've done studies showing that only 2.5% of the melatonin will actually absorb into the system. So when you do a rectal delivery, first of all, the first time I ever was exposed to this, I was actually really sick with mold and Lyme disease, so I was desperate. And when someone suggested that I start utilizing a glutathione suppository, I was like, okay. Normally I would have been like, no way, exit only, blah, blah, blah. But what I discovered, it was so easy, like it took seconds. It was there. I didn't even know it was there. And it was really no big deal. And what I found was that it really moved the needle on how I felt. And so now I'm healthy. I'm not dealing with Lyme. I'm not dealing with mold. Overall, I feel, I'm going to be 54 next month, actually. Wow. At the end of this month. And I feel like I'm in my 30s, and a lot of people, will say I look much younger than I am.
Definitely.
And I still take a lot of these products and different suppositories because it really moves the needle, and it allows me to function at such a higher level before I get fatigued, right? Before the stresses accumulate, where then I'm like, okay, I need to rest. I don't have the energy for this. And so I think anybody that's really looking to biohack at the maximum, or they're looking to do something that from a supplement standpoint that really moves the needle, open your mind up, consider this absorption aspect, and maybe give a try. Like, we have an NAD suppository where you don't have to go sit at an IV center and get, pay $500 to $1,000 and sit there for hours. The IVs are a bit uncomfortable as well. These suppositories, I think, are even more effective than the IVs anyway, because you can do multiple times a week and you don't have to take any time out of your day. Glutathione is another really powerful substance with rectal delivery. Very anti-inflammatory, very good for viral immunity. It's very good to detoxify heavy metals because it grabs, glutathione grabs around different molecules and it chaperones them out of the body, different toxins. It's one of our main detox pathways. Is a healthy liver produces glutathione, and the glutathione kind of helps to protect us. And it's also one of the sleep promoting substances, and that's why we like to combine it with our melatonin bullet, and so that that also is not very well absorbed melatonin. So we use higher doses of melatonin. Initially, you had asked me to speak a little bit about melatonin, and we could do a whole show on melatonin, really. And I've done a lot of entire shows on it. People can find if they search. But I like to call melatonin the body's master support as far as buffering stress, right? So it's a protection molecule, right? And it does that because it sits in every mitochondria. It's literally right where we make energy. It's like we have an engine, it's making energy, and melatonin's right there. And it comes in play when we have enough stress where things need to be kind of like calmed down a little bit so that the engine doesn't overheat. And so when you add melatonin in, you can actually run that engine at a higher RPM, at a higher level, without it burning out, right? So it raises the ceiling, the metabolic ceiling, and the capacity to our body to deal and adapt with more stresses. It's also something that a lot of people are very depleted with because of all the unnatural lights that are interfering with our ability to build melatonin and to secrete it when we go to bed. People have poor sleep habits and sleep conditions and hygiene with sleep. And so aging causes a massive decline in melatonin, no matter what you do. I don't care if you're wearing the right glasses and you're doing this and you're doing that. After the age of 40, melatonin just drops off a cliff, right?
Yep.
And if we want to preserve our body and have a strategy for anti-aging, I just can't think of many substances outside of melatonin, and not being afraid of taking higher doses of melatonin because there's no negative feedback loop, as you mentioned earlier, and there's no toxicity to it. And so if we're taking melatonin strictly for sleep, then we may not need to go with much higher doses, although some people find that it really does maximize their sleep even more. But when we start looking at melatonin for things like infections, clearing toxins from the body, or if we're traveling or if we're under different types of stressful situations, we can utilize melatonin to really protect us and keep us a lot more strong and resilient.
Yeah. You know, I recall now how I first came across your work and started like working with MITOZEN and the company. It's because of the glutastat product. And so this was in the midst of the pandemic, and I wanted a solution for nebulized glutathione. So that's when I started to get the glutastat product, which is great. And then I think sometime after that, I discovered, well, I wanted to try the Biohacker's travel kit. And you had the Sandman in there, I believe, the Sandman bullet. Does that have glutathione in it as well?
It does a little bit.
The thing that I love about, so I know Gordon showed on the screen, he showed the bullets, all the different suppositories that you offer. And I have to touch on the fact that, like you mentioned, once you get over it, like the first couple of times you do it, you realize how easy it is. And then when you understand how effective it is, I think more people should be considering suppositories. And suppositories is great, anally, for men, but for women as well, they can also do it vaginally.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's also like a really cool thing for some, like for females, especially, like consider these different options, these different methods of delivery. Right. And I think it's really, really interesting. So there's plenty on the site to check out. Like I said, I've done the Sandman. I have not tried the methylene blue bullet though. So, but I might have that on hold in case there's something serious that comes about. Hopefully not. But when you
Yeah.
mentioned like being careful with the gut bacteria or the large intestine, it made me think, okay, it's worth mentioning.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it absorbs so well through the stomach that there's very few, like when you look at the peak plasma, like you might look at doing a methylene blue suppository in the sense if you're wanting to like really elevate that methylene blue in the blood. And this, I think, might make more sense if somebody was really dealing with like an infection.
Mm-hmm.
And they were utilizing some light therapy and so forth. But
yeah.
But even in those situations, like the oral is really fine. It works really well.
Perfect. Okay, so we've touched on methylene blue, we've touched on melatonin, and we've certainly dived in on CO2. So that was great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the other things that you're doing, because if someone, and we'll obviously list to your social media, because I think everyone should go and check this guy out. Like it's very fun to just kind of be a fly on the wall with all things MITOZEN and Dr. John Lieurance. So, but you also have Hape, or the Zen spray, I should say.
Yeah.
And you've got the blue eyes. You've got the what is it called? The root Zen.
Zen, yeah.
Root Zen.
I remember when we recorded our last podcast, you did it for the first time because you were like, "Oh, I've just been like using this cologne or something." Like, "Oh no, that goes on the perineum." And you're like, "Oh, really? Okay, hold on." You like,
yeah. Well, let's just say that I've thanks to you and Root Zen, I now have a new party trick.
It's fun to take the parties, right? And this, you like,
absolutely.
It's interesting, like, the people that go for it, like, they're like people that you really want to hang out with and they trust you.
Bingo.
And some people are a little bit stiff. Oh, well, no, okay, no, I'll do it later or whatever, right? But then you got some people that are fun and they'll just go ahead and do that Root Zen right then and there. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's really good because it has this like grounding effect. And like when you're in a social situation, Root Zen actually is kind of nice, whether you go to the bathroom and apply it or if you get really quick. Like I've gotten myself to be very efficient where I can even do it like at the dinner table and you wouldn't even know it.
So, okay, because this is such a great conversation, I think we should at least explain what this is. And for those who don't know what the perineum is, and let's also talk about the differences between men and women and the size and the space and being careful. Just quickly go over that because I think it's worth mentioning for sure.
Yeah, so the perineum is the space between the anus and the penis or the anus and the vagina. And it's very small in women, right? I mean, it's just a small area where it's very, very big with men. So when you apply it, you take the oil and you get a little bit on the tip of your finger and then it's a dab. It's not you're not wiping it. You're just dabbing it right in that kind of central area. Some people call it the taint, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it taint this and it taint that, right?
Right.
But women need to be a little bit more like surgical about it, where they place it, because if it gets in the wrong place, it gets, it's a bit uncomfortable. When you get it right where it needs to go, it's the opposite. Like it's very cooling. There's a lot of cooling herbs and oils in there, and it activates acupuncture points. And I also sometimes I like to do the Root Zen right on the sides of the nose because it just totally opens up the sinuses and the nasal passage. You can also, another place I really like to put it on is stomach 36. You know where that is? Stomach 36? Okay. Well, there's this saying in Chinese medicine, like they say, don't trust a man unless he's got a scar over the stomach 36, because these people are always putting needles because supporting the stomach is a big part of life force, right? And when we have a strong stomach, we're digesting food very powerfully. And this is kind of like, you go back to our conversation about stomach acid blockers and the standard of care there. And then you go to like Eastern medicine and the importance of strong stomach acid and our ability to really break food down and how hearty and vital that makes an individual. That's a really interesting conversation. So anyway, stomach 36 is, so on the video, it's like right on the side of the knee, like right there.
Oh, I thought you were going to go to your stomach. I thought you were going to show those abs.
Yeah, later.
Okay, so it's kind of, for those who aren't watching, it's kind of like the top of the shin or the top of the anterior tip.
Outer, right, outer. And you could probably Google stomach 36, and there's probably all kinds of stuff on Google Images and so forth. But yeah, that's a good spot to inject B12 as well. Really powerful. Like if you're into like B12 injections or multiple when we do a B12 injection here, what we do is we go B12, B6, thiamine. We put MIC, it's a MIC complex, which has a few things in it. And yeah, so it's a combination of all those things. But I like to take that, and I'll do this with patients sometimes as well, is just put like a half a cc in stomach 36 on either side. And man, if you're worn out and you're tired, exhausted, you're like immediately like back. It's pretty wild.
Wow. So a dab of root zen there is a good protocol, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll try that, because I will say I love how you pointed out the fact that like you know who you're dealing with based on if they're willing to do a dab of root zen in the perineum, on the perineum. And that's happened to me a couple times.
Yeah.
And I was immediately like, you're cool.
Right.
Like, right. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So root zen, guys, it's a fun one. And it also has a nice smell too. Right. So if you got, issues going on, then it might clean that up too. Anyway,
well, it almost makes a good cologne. I mean, I know when I'm out and I've got that around, the women go crazy. They're like, "Wow, that is a really nice blend of essential oils."
I think that's just them trying to shoot their shot, Doc. I think there's something else going on, man. But anyway, okay, so we got the root zen. Let's talk about blue eyes, because I know when we recorded before, I had just gotten into using blue eyes, and I've seen you use it on social media. Can you talk a little bit about that? Basically, that's methylene blue eye drops, everybody. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a combination of methylene blue, EDTA, a little bit of peppermint. So when you put it in your eye, there's like this kind of nice, cooling, fresh feeling, and gold and silver. And the reason that we put gold and silver in with it is because those two substances have been shown in research, and we talk about this in the book as well, to enhance the photo dynamic aspect of methylene blue. And what that means basically is that methylene blue, being blue, it absorbs red, right? And it reflects blue. That's why it looks blue. And so when the methylene blue gets into the cells, it has an affinity into the mitochondria, and then it sits into the mitochondria, and it allows those photons to come pull into the mitochondria, because our energy is able to be produced by both that's the Irie, which is another really good eye drop, but that's got Sananga in it.
I was going to ask you about that, because I love Sananga.
Yeah, we're in the process of combining blue eyes with Irie so that we have like the ultimate like spiritual eye drop, right? Now, Irie burns where blue eyes doesn't really burn. It's like mildly kind of cooling for a moment. But this whole photo biomodulation, this photo dynamic aspect is really powerful, because your eyes are like the window into your brain. Your brain feeds on this afferent, nerve input through the eyes. And then the eyes have a nerve that goes all the way back to the pineal, which is how we store melatonin. So the light activates this nerve pathway. So when we put the blue eyes in and we look at light, we let light penetrate while the blue eyes is really thick in the eyes. So once you drop it into the eyes, you don't want to like really squeeze the eyes. You don't want to push it out. You want to try to kind of leave it like a kind of a glaze over it. And then I like to do that at the beach because I'm close to the water and I can watch the sun come up, and I like to let the sun go through my eyes, and the sun and those photons are picking up the energy from the gold and the silver and the methylene blue, carrying that all the way back to the pineal. And I feel like I've got more intuition, when I'm doing that regularly. I feel like it activates my pineal in a way where my meditations are a little bit deeper. I feel a little bit more connected. And that's important to me because when I come to the clinic and I've got a patient there, it's not, for me, it's not just a mechanical job, like my joy comes from really connecting with that person and understanding them. We have a practice where it's not a high volume practice. We see, maybe 10, maybe 15 patients in a day, so I have the ability to spend an hour or more with the patient, really connect with them. And having a really strong pineal, I think, really makes a big difference in our ability to really flow with life. And anyway, I'm going to start sounding kind of woo-woo, but that's it.
Hey, it is what it is, man. I love it, and thanks to you, I was able to kind of explore with that. Like, and I'm happy that you gave some of the protocols because, like, me being someone that's a fan of Sananga or Sanenga, like having the blue eyes is no problem for me whatsoever. However, I did not really take the advice then of like just leaving it in your eyes and letting it go around, because I end up having teardrops when I do it. And so I just kind of wipe it off my face.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to take heed to what you mentioned in terms of like not squinting or not wiping it off immediately, like letting it glaze. I think that's a really good bit of advice. So I'm going to try that. And then if you're not fortunate, like John is, being in on the beach out in the sun, then obviously you can go to your red light panels or even here in New York, you can just go out when the sun is at, kind of in the morning as it's rising, right? You can go out and just kind of gaze at the sun. And that's like a good way to hack that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's challenging in the city for people, and I've been there. I just recently moved back closer to the beach, and I was living in a place where I could not really, I had to like go in my backyard, and it was always kind of coming through trees, and it wasn't like, like what I wanted. But, people can relocate, sometimes that's the proper thing to do, is to find a better living situation where you can get sun. I mean, it is so important to get sun. And we're polluted with light, like fluorescent and, synthetic lights. And it's been shown to cause cancer. The opposite of what I think they would want you to, that, culturally, we're told that the sun causes cancer, right? And our dermatology institutions talk about, people are hiding from the sun, right? They're wearing sunglasses. I go to the beach. We have a lot of New Yorkers that come to Sarasota, and I sit there and I watch people walk down the beach completely covered up when it's like 8 a.m. I mean, it's not even intense sun, big sunglasses on, huge sombrero, it's like they're just terrified of the sun. Because
vampires,
they're going to get cancer from sun exposure.
Yeah.
But what they found is it's the opposite, that, when we don't get sun, it's more linked to the artificial light of a lot of the skin cancers and the breast cancers. That was the particular study that I recently read, which showed that the amount of light that people are getting and not getting the sun was more of an influence to breast cancer than too much sun.
And also, isn't there something, I can't recall the pathway or the mechanism of action, but isn't there something where even if you're not covered up and you do want to absorb the sun, I think there's something involved where if you don't allow your eyes to also take in that same amount of sun, like if you wear sunglasses, then that raises your risk for skin damage, right?
Yeah. And also we have to think about windows, right? And how much of the ultraviolet is blocked through our windows in our cars.
Yeah.
So Sometimes people think that they're getting sun, but you can't really, you need to get out into nature. You need with no barriers where the sun's actually hitting in as much skin as you can expose. Some of the big experts with photobiomodulation and sun, talk about just going into your backyard naked, no clothes, and just bathe in the sun.
Oh yeah. Well, there was that big movement of what was it? The perineum tanning or whatever it was. I mean, I know there was like a bunch of like videos and photos of people with their legs up, butt naked, pointing to the sun. But I mean, hey, however you got to get it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we got we talked about the Hop 8 or the Zen spray a little bit. We talked about Blue Eyes, Irie. We talked about melatonin, of course, methylene blue. The Root Zen.
By the way, are you using the Zen with your breath work?
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that? Tell me your protocol.
So, yeah, good. Okay, good question. So, it wasn't until you and I connected directly, and then I showed you a video of me inhaling it, like when I would spray the Zen spray. I do not do that, right? I just let it sit in my nose. Once I've cleared it all out and there is no risk of me like getting a big whiff of it, that's when I then go into my breath work. So, and then I've also been experimenting with YAGE. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And I've been also kind of, I don't like to say playing with it, but I've been experimenting with utilizing both of those and then those substances individually as well. And it's been interesting, it's been interesting.
Have you tried doing the Zen after the breaths as well? Like, so I noticed that I did a video with Ben Greenfield, and we put it in the Dot Club. We probably ought to touch on that too, because a lot of people, if they're interested in finding some of these products, they need to know that much of those products are not available to the public. That's and right. They're only available to club members. And so MITOZEN.club, $10 lifetime membership fee. And that allows us to do a little bit more education because it's membership based. And we're also able to provide a lot of these products are not, they're kind of in line with more prescription in the sense that they're very powerful, so we want to make sure that we're educating people on how to use them. People listening to podcasts like this, it's really important. It's not your average supplement line as people might be kind of starting to pick up. But back to this point. So and when you come to town, you and we need to go to the beach and we need to do a breathwork session and we'll record it. Yep. I'll put that in our library because I'm putting breathwork sessions with like all these amazing people, and we do it in a certain way. And oftentimes we're using things like Zen, but Ben did the Zen before we even started, just like you. I like to do the Zen after the series of breaths, right? So it's like if you're doing Wim Hof, you're breathing. And then that last breath, I inhale, spray, and then I exhale, hold my breath. And then oftentimes I'll like kind of blow my nose as well, so it doesn't drip back. And I find that bliss point that you get after all the breaths is accentuated. It's almost like I'm getting to this high point with the breath, and then it takes me even further with the Zen, where I feel just blissed out when I do it that way.
I'm going to try that. I think I told myself or I observed that it was a lot easier for me to breathe, or like even if I don't have any breathing problems when I go into breath work, I just find my nasal passage completely open when I do it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so
there's nicotine in the Zen, right? So it's a sacred tobacco that is basically makes it, but nicotinic receptors, we have them in our body, and these receptors can be very, very beneficial. They enhances mood, focus, concentration. It doesn't generally make us too jittery, and so it can enhance our respiratory cycle a little bit and making breath work a little bit more graceful.
Yeah, I would attest to that for sure. So then, and yes, I'm going to take you up on that offer on coming down there, because I can just imagine the amount of content we can get. I just had this visual of us going out to a group of people and being like, "Hey, you want to try some root zen?"
Oh, I know.
You know.
Josh, have you done stem cells? Have you done like any stem cell like systemically, like in an IV? Like, have you gone to Panama or Mexico, or you done any of these like more elaborate?
I am on the books to do that next month, the middle of next month.
Okay, where at?
Tijuana.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I would like to tell you, like, and you're already going. That's fine. You have to let me know how that goes.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Hey, let's talk.
Yeah.
So placenta stem cells. So most companies, what they're using is they're using either stem cells from something called Wharton's jelly, or they're taking it from the cord blood, or like placental based, right? And these are very, very powerful stem cells. They're very young. They have a strong affinity to stimulate a regenerative effect in the body. The one downside to them is that they're very fragile. And once they're injected either into a joint or if they're done IV, they only last for just hours. And so when you understand like how stem cells work, is there's something called an exosome, and people that might be looking at stem cells, they might be hearing the word exosome, and exosomes can be harnessed by themselves and used as an injection. And stem cells, what they do is when they're activated, they are going to home in on an injury. In other words, if you break a bone or injure yourself, or you have liver issues or something like that, there's going to be a triggering mechanism that's going to tell the stem cells to migrate to that body part, and they have a stickiness to them, and they adhese next to where that damage is, and then they start to bud off all of these exosomes, and the exosomes shower your existing cells and tissues to tell them to go into a youthful growth repair phase, right? And that's how stem cells work. It's not as much as what we thought before, where these cells are then multiplying and differentiating into like various lineages. Because if you think about it, you're not going to have a stem cell from somebody else start to duplicate and become your own cells. It doesn't work that way. So it's more of a messenger and an influence within that system. What we've discovered is we call them X cells, and these X cells are derived from fat tissue. Okay. And we have a partner that is basically doing liposuctions on young, healthy individuals or early 20s, highly vetted. I mean, if these people had a vaccine, they're not allowed to participate. And so he has a system where he's able to take the stem cells out of the fat. And these stem cells are a certain type of stem cell that they call adipose-derived stem cells. And they've started to really do some deep studies on these adipose-derived stem cells. And what they found is they literally survive weeks. And they produce exosomes hour after hour for weeks, versus the placental stem cells are literally producing exosomes for a shorter period of time. So they're super, super hardy, and they have more of an affinity to enhance new blood supply to tissues, which is generally why we have a lot of disease in the beginning, like our heart, our lungs, degenerative joints. If we're looking to do our hair, we just did a case where we did his knees, and we also did a pea shot where we did these injections in and around the penis, because he had an injury and had erectile dysfunction, right? And so for a lot of these different applications, these cells actually work much better because of their ability to enhance vascular endothelial growth factor and so forth. Typically, what they'll do in Tijuana or Mexico or Panama or Colombia is that they're going to infuse 2 million stem cells 2 different days. And the reason they need to do 2 is because, again, the survivability isn't as high. We're using 2 million of these adipose stem cells with cases, And I got to tell you, I've done a lot of stem cell therapy. I mean, I've been in the business for 25 years. I've tried a lot of different IVs, and this XCell 2 million IV has been something that has moved the needle on me and my patients more than anything else I've seen. And then the application neurologically, right? So there's a way to administer these cells that go primarily into the brain through what's called an intrathecal injection, which is basically through like the lower lumbar spine that goes right in the cerebral spinal fluid. Or there's another technique where you can give them IV mannitol, which is a type of sugar that breaks down the blood-brain barrier, where you can get it into the brain. And some of the results we're seeing with stroke and different degenerative neurologic disorders and traumatic brain injuries is just nothing less than a miracle.
So because I have heard a lot of this, right? So I know the different types of stem cells. I've been with various clients who've gotten stem cells, so I've seen it. I've seen the adipose-derived situation, because I always kind of thought like, oh, if anybody is going to get stem cells, they may as well do the adipose-derived ones, because you're going to get a free liposuction in the meantime.
Uh-huh.
And so I've always kind of understood some of this, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around the IV portion of it. How is it that, or what are the benefits? Is it, when you're doing an IV, I understand that it's supposed to be systemic, but is it also something in which you would follow that up with a joint injection as well? Or is it purely systemic IV?
Well, it depends. You know, if you have an individual that is looking for a systemic effect, certainly if there's like a lung issue or a heart issue or a neurologic issue, Crohn's disease, I mean, there's been some really good studies on this exact stem cell line, and it's not just adipose-derived stem cells. It's also what's called the vascular fraction. So the fraction is a part of the fat, and the scientists are literally, so the mesenchymal stem cell, the type of mesenchymal stem cell is the adipose-derived stem cell, but that's not the only thing that's in this product. There's also the vascular fraction, and some scientists are actually thinking that has more of a regenerative effect than the actual MSCs. So I almost look at it like, you know, the argument with like, you're going to get vitamin C, you know, you're going to have better utilization of vitamin C from an orange versus taking it synthetically in an isolation situation, where it's more of like this whole food type of preparation.
So then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like with this XCell IV, it sounds like it's a process in which you don't get your own fat-derived stem cells, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So this is an option, and we've been doing this for years, where we do a mini lipo. The deal is that this partner of ours is doing a system where he's not stressing these cells out, so his yield of stem cell per fat is just incredible, and then he immediately freezes it to a very, very low. In fact, we can't even keep it in our special freezer that goes to -80. We actually have to have liquid nitrogen, right? So it's literally like in liquid nitrogen under, you know, in the fluid there.
Wow.
And once we pull it out, we literally need to get it into the body within a short period of time, no longer than an hour, because they don't survive very well without enough nutrients, right? So there's very, very specific ways that this needs to be handled. And I think that, you know, there's not a lot of education within a lot of regenerative medicine clinics. I've been to a lot of them, and some of the things that I think people need to really pay attention to is people that have been doing it long enough. They know how to handle these things. They understand, they have the equipment. One of the biggest things is the injection technique. These clinics need to be really good with ultrasound, right? So like, for instance, this patient where we treated his knees, it's not just into the joint. It's also, we went into the medial and lateral collateral ligament, very specifically into areas that were worn and torn, around into the meniscus. He had this big tear in the infrapatellar tendon, right? And he had a calcium that was kind of like coming out. And that was his main complaint when he was walking. He was having this like anterior knee pain. But without ultrasound, you'd never see that calcium. And so we were able to go in there and break that calcium up and then like directly inject right into that that crack and when that tear that was in that tendon. And right when we did that, he was like, man, that if I could, this is exactly what he said. If I could draw a bullseye, like you were right on the spot that I had my pain, right? But you can't do that blind. And there's so many doctors that will just go to the grave to say that they're doing perfect work and that blind injections, they've been doing it so long. And they might sit there and argue that it's not necessary, but it's really, really important within stem cell therapy. So if somebody has a knee problem, you want to directly get those stem cells into the knee. You also want to combine it with PRP, because what you got with your PRP and your plasma is something called fibrin. And fibrin's like this like spaghetti matrix material. So once that goes into collagen and it hits the tissue, it turns into a hard jelly, like a blood clot, and it holds the grafting. So it's like the graft. And then you have the stem cells within that. And you really want to have that scaffolding material along with the stem cells to get the best result, especially when you start dealing with orthopedic conditions.
So then, yes, it would be IV for systemic and local joint injection, right?
Right. Yeah. If you have like rotator cuff, if you've got spinal issues, if you've got pain or damage within your musculoskeletal system, you really want to directly inject those. That would be number one. The IV might be somebody that is either looking to do like it in a biohacking type of situation, for longevity or for enhancing their hormones or for like just enhancing their overall health and vitality. Or it might be an individual that has a disease process, whether it's neurologically or it's an organ dysfunction or an autoimmune disease. These cells are really, really powerful for autoimmune conditions.
Beautiful. Okay. Because, yeah, it is interesting. Like, that was part of the reason why I was curious in doing it, was more or less from the like longevity perspective and sort of the biohacking perspective. And again, like I have a lot of opportunities to do some cool things, but I definitely think we should talk offline because, it might be another good reason to be able to pop down to Sarasota and,
we could document it. Document it, have you come down, do it.
I want to do the P shot too.
Million. You want to do a P shot? Yep.
Why not?
The Superman shot.
Yeah, man. Yeah, because, I've dabbled into a lot of these things, and I know like there's a lot of facilities that are using like the medical wave or shockwave therapy to kind of help the stem cell production. And then I also understand that there's a bit of downtime when you inject a joint. I mean, I'm sure it differs for each person. Mm-hmm. Is that true? Like, is that usually what you see?
Yeah. So initially you're going to have swelling and inflammation, which is what you want. That's why we don't want people to take anti-inflammatories in the short term after the injections. But, generally I'd say after a day or two, it's close to baseline. We found that utilizing, like what you said, the shockwave therapy, or that we call it the stem wave, which mm-hmm. is acoustic wave therapy. We do that leading up to the treatment, before the treatment. We do that, a few days after the treatment usually. And then laser, we actually have a laser that's the strongest laser in the country. It's 75,000 millivolts. So you want to talk about deep photobiomodulation, something that can get like deep into the body. That laser does the job. And so we laser the areas after we do the injections, and it allows the energy to be so powerful that the healing is so rapid. And oftentimes people aren't as sore that night, and their recovery is very, very quick.
Dude, it sounds like we are coming up with some kind of retreat or event idea in Florida. I would love to, let's chop it up afterwards, right? Some other time, let's talk about some things we could do, because, together with some of the stuff that I'm doing in the fitness space and the biohacking space, along with what you're doing, I really think that we have an opportunity to really move the needle for a lot of people. and I would love to explore what that would look like. And I've been doing some work with Vivo Barefoot. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Oh, yeah, love
I've
their products. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been an ambassador for them for, I mean, since, well, I started work with, like, I became a coach back in 2009. And
Uh-huh.
so I've been a fan for a long time. And now I'm in a position to be able to start kind of curating some events and just to bring awareness to the world of barefoot, not necessarily just the shoes, but this whole lifestyle of barefoot. And I
Hmm.
feel like you have the perfect setup and the space for it. So we should talk.
We have the event center as well, so we can hold about 50 people in the event center. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I'll take some pictures of it and I'll text them to you. Yeah,
Perfect.
I love it. That's kind of my mission. I love to teach and I love to share and I love to be in person. I mean, for me, doing things on Zoom and distance stuff, it's like, okay, that's fine. But there's nothing better than putting like a really powerful group of people together and going through a process for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and like exactly what you're talking about.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, you heard it here, everyone. We're gonna do something. Mark my words. Hopefully, we get something on the book soon, and we'll let everyone know. So I we've been going at this for quite a while. I love chatting with you. I could chat forever and ever and ever, but I think we should save some for another podcast in the future. Um, Before we ask the last two questions that I like to ask, is there anything else that is just burning you to talk about right now for today's discussion?
Nothing's coming up. I feel like we've really covered a lot of, we've touched on a lot of things. I don't think we've gone really deep on any
Right.
one thing.
Right.
But I think it's enough for people to get excited about some of the things we talked about, and then maybe looking at, reading some of the material with the books. You and I will have to do another part
Yeah.
two, and
Yeah.
maybe get a little bit deeper into methylene blue or melatonin or something else. Or maybe you could ask your followers and just see like
Exactly.
what do people want to hear more of, and we can dive into that.
I love that idea, and I've been thinking about doing that. So yes, you're absolutely right. I'm going to reach out to the community, see what they would like to know more about, what they want to dive into, and then of course, as we get together and we start doing some content, I'm sure more questions will come up and more things. And I definitely want to try this new product, the Satori you're talking about.
Yeah.
Would love to try that. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, I'm happy to try anything you send me, man. So feel free.
Okay.
So, as you probably recall, I like to ask two questions to wrap up the show.
Okay.
The first question is, what are your top one or two pet peeves? What are a couple
Mm.
things that just really annoy you? And I can't even remember what you said last time, but it doesn't even have to be the same. But just what comes to mind of something that
Well,
just,
you know what really comes to mind for me, because I was just having this conversation with a patient that I was working with, and it's like the things that bother us are the things that we don't like about ourselves, you know?
ooh,
And whether we want to admit it or not, there's a part of us that could be like that, right? And it's a part
mm,
that's the shadow self that we're not accepting, right? Like I was dating somebody recently, right? And I was on the phone with someone, almost like kind of counseling, because I was like a little heartbroken, and I was like, but like this woman, she's like all over the place and she's not present with me, and she's like on her phone all the time, right? And her response was, well, aren't you like that sometimes? And I'm like, you know
ooh.
what? You nailed it. Like I am, and that's something that when I'm in that place, I don't really like myself. Like I would rather be the guy that's present with someone that sets their phone down and is like, really in the now moment.
That's
Um,
deep. That's deep.
so with that said, there are a lot of things that I get irritable about. But when I get irritable, I sit back and I think about, I could be doing that, right? Or I could be guilty of that. Or there's a part of me that could also be that way, given the right set and circumstances. And then I stop judging people so much. It just takes the
Ooh.
it takes the heat out of that judgment.
Oh, I love that. This is certainly a first, and I appreciate you saying that, man, because that gives me a little bit more patience. I mean,
Hmm.
at least in this moment right now, I can think about all the things that I get peeved about, and I'm like, do I really need to be that peeved about it? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right, like we are all brothers and sisters, right? We're all one. And so if I'm getting upset or angry or irritated by someone in some action, I'm also getting, having this same kind of effect to myself. And it doesn't really do anybody any good. So,
Right.
so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Last question. What is something you are most grateful for?
I am so grateful for so much. I mean, right now, I am the most grateful for my staff and all of the beautiful beings that are part of my team. And, yesterday I had a little bit of a sinus infection, and you saw the ski trip I went on, right? I really overdid it. And I came back and I had like a little upper respiratory, and it seemed to kind of go away, but then it went into my sinuses over the weekend. So I came in, I'm like, ladies, I told my nurse, I need to do an IV, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm just being loved on by my nurse practitioner. And it's just like, I'm here getting the best healthcare in the world. And it's like, I'm like 10 feet from my desk. So I'm super grateful for that. And I wish I could like give that to everybody, but it's just, I've just chosen a career that allows me to have that grace. But there's just very, very few people that, I've worked with in my career, because I've worked with people that irritated me quite a bit. But it's like, for some reason, I'm surrounded by all these people that are just amazing right now. And I'm super grateful for that.
That's beautiful, man. That is beautiful. So shout out to the MITOZEN team and anyone that's involved. I mean, I've had some interaction with some of your team, and they've been nothing but the best, the greatest. So, shout out to them from me as well. Dr. John, this has been fun, man. And I really wholeheartedly want to thank you for your time, because I know your time is precious, like all of ours are.
Yeah.
And I really look forward to creating some stuff together. You're definitely someone I look up to in this biohacking space and just life, So, and what's really cool about that is we haven't even met physically, but that's okay, because we have.
I feel like I know you,
right?
You're a brother already.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, much appreciated. We will link to the book, multiple books. We will link to the website. Also, reminder for everyone, check out mitozen.club. And like Dr. John mentioned, it's just a $10 lifetime membership. You pay it one time. That's it. You get access to most of the things, I think all the things we talked about. And then also that's probably where we're going to announce some of the things we're going to do together. So definitely check that out. And if you have any questions for me, hit me up. If you have questions for Dr. John, we'll provide the information and the best ways to get in touch with him. So thanks for your time.
Beautiful. Josh, pleasure.
Yes, sir. All right. And until next time, everyone, this is Josh signing out from Simply Walk the Talk. Peace.
Simply walk the talk. Walk the talk, talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seat belts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen.